let's welcome the NX team panel. Hello, everyone.
Hey.
All right. I'll do a quick round of introductions. That's okay. So that we can get straight into questions. Victor's smirking. He knows I'm going to skip him.
It's okay. Yeah.
The man who needs no introduction, Victor Safkin. We've got Kirill Zladovs.
No, it's okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. We've got Colin Ferry representing.
Go ahead.
Yuri, John Kamasuli, Jack Sue. You're supposed to wave. Katerina. There's no Malone today. Jason Jean, and of course Victor. Victor, you didn't wave. Oh, there you go. Okay. All right.
Due to delay.
Oh, Brandon's back. Brandon, how are you doing?
I'm hopefully better now, but we'll see.
Much better.
Okay, great.
All right.
I mean, I like the robot talk. It makes for better conversation in the chat, but I would like to sound clear, so I'm glad we're better now.
People did say it was like you were more friendly as a robot than as a person. Like you're less rude to me.
That's something a robot would say, actually. You're supposed to be friendly so people will let their guard down, right?
And you just became a robot again.
Of course I did.
But you know what? It's okay. You can still ask questions. We can make out what you're saying. All right. So we've got some questions. Feel free to pop in the Slack, ask some questions there, and we'll be keeping an eye on that and try to get to as much as we can. The link to join the Slack and the Slack channel are in the YouTube description. All right. First and foremost, what's coming up in NX 13? Everybody wants to know, what have you done for me lately? What do we have to look forward to? I'll put this one to Jack.
Yeah, I think everyone can probably chime in a bit. But for the React side, the major changes we're trying to make, or we're making, is getting Webpack 5 to be the default. So currently you can opt in. And we've been fixing some issues as we go. But once NX 13 comes out, Webpack 5 will be the default. And you can still opt in to Webpack 4 for a time being, just so the migration is a little smoother for teams. But in the future version, we will remove that support.
Cool. All right, that's it. That's what's coming in NX 13, Webpack 5 for React.
I guess I can talk about the core side.
Yeah.
From the core side, we're working on consolidating configuration. So we're trying to make it simpler to set up an NX workspace and not having to have information split between NX JSON and workspace JSON. So soon you'll be able to have everything in workspace JSON or like very little in NX JSON.
It's surprising how much people care about JSON files and splitting things, but it is a thing. Like I'm not saying it's illegitimate. It's just surprising like the separation of project configuration into multiple files has been a pretty big welcome change.
Yeah, that has happened. So we for many years people asked us to split one giant configuration file into many smaller configuration files, and I think that's a legitimate ask, because if you have a large workspace with 1,000 projects, you have like if you combine all the configurations, it's a very large file, so it makes rebasing painful, a lot of things painful.
Yeah.
So this has happened, and what we're doing now is just like cleaning it up. Because it happened, now we have a much cleaner arrangement. We can make workspace JSON file optional. Like if you all the configuration files live next to the project, the one that's right now that workspace JSON file has is basically lists the projects, right? And we know what projects you have. You don't have to list them, right? So it's just something that we kept. So it's not a drastic change for folks, because we, as I said many times, care about not breaking folks. So all the changes regarding configuration won't break. Like we'll make them to your workspace, and everything you had, should work in exactly the same way. So hopefully you'll have like one few configuration files the end, right? And everything will be next to the project. One other point I want to make, which is something adjacent to that, is that folks who aren't familiar with NX, like external folks who want to try it out, sometimes make a comment that oh, this configuration is extra. Ooh, NX is full of configuration, right? And like I don't like it, right? But it's actually not true in that configuration replaces some configuration you would have had in a different file, right? So you either configure Webpack in your Webpack file, right? Or you like invoke the next plugin to configure Webpack. That configuration is present somewhere, right? So like it's an addition to what you had, right? It's in the replacement of most of the time, right? Not always, but most of the time. So the amount of configuration in totality, right, doesn't increase, right? It remains roughly the same or even smaller in many projects. And the last point is that we care a lot about like not breaking you, evolving the configuration with you as NX, as we release new versions of NX. Hence the JSON configuration that we have, like it's toolable because we care about like transforming it. If it was a JavaScript file, like Webpack does it, for example, right? That thing is like it's very challenging to update with a guarantee. All right, you can try to guess and change the JS file, but because you cannot really predict what folks are going to write in there, it kind of works most of the time, but not always. Whereas for us, we know for a fact it works, right? Because the configuration is toolable. Our migrations can look at it and do whatever we want with it, right? So, so that is just a side note. Since we're talking about configuration, and I will mention one thing that I mentioned a few days ago in our private conversation, is that there's one more thing, exactly. So is in NX 13, it's already actually in NX 12.9, it's just secretly hidden, so you don't know about it. The support for like the daemon way of, or like a background way of running the workspace analysis is coming, and James Henry is working on it. And basically the idea with that is NX is actually pretty fast and pretty smart about analyzing your workspace, not to reanalyze things for no reason. It caches some stuff to make sure whatever it knows it can reuse, etc. Right? But for a large workspace with like 100,000 files, right, there still be a small delay just about figuring out what the hell is going on. Like, so all of those things. The delay is not that big. It doesn't affect CI, but you can still feel it sometimes as a developer. So if you have like a very large workspace, what the daemon or the background way of running the analysis can do, it can sort of guess that something has changed. It can see it right ahead of time, reanalyze it ahead of time, such that when you actually invoke a command, you get it instantly, like in milliseconds, right? So that's coming. So it's going to be speedy. It's speedy, yeah. It's already pretty fast, but it's going to be even speedier for large workspaces, which we're excited about as well. And then, of course, many other things are coming, right? So there are cool changes to depgraph that Philip is merging, because depgraph, again, if you have 1,000 projects in your workspace, depgraph right now is it can be challenging to navigate, right? And there are really cool changes in that makes it a lot more useful, right? You can actually look at a giant workspace and figure out what the hell is going on, right? Things like that, right?
By the way, plug for
and many others, right?
Later today, he's got a talk where he goes into the depth graph and how to use it as a power user, and he's the main person working on it, so it'll be chock full of Easter eggs for depth graph.
Yep.
Anyone else want to chime in with interesting thing? Oh, an interesting thing they're working on. I have one more question, but I'm going to wait until after this. And anything interesting with NX 13 you want to highlight?
I think from the storybook side, like we don't have anything like big just hitting for NX 13. Like we have been improving a lot of things like from NX 12 to NX 13, like on the road, which is mostly we collaborate with the storybook team when Angular upgraded with Webpack 5. So we helped basically the storybook team debug stuff which were broken, and at the same time, obviously, we made sure that NX integration worked nicely. We are doing the same thing now with React, as Jack mentioned, because like the React default will be Webpack 5 starting with NX 13. So we'll make sure that also perfectly aligns with the storybook setup. And so that's also another thing which we did there in the storybook setup between NX 12 and NX 13, and that just landed a couple of versions ago, which is like a predefined preset for React. So we have much more control over how storybook is being launched. We make sure we use the same underlying configuration which you would use for a React application, also an actual storybook serving, which made it much nicer. One thing is definitely that Katrina is working on, which I know is like more on the storybook composition side. So a lot of people are asking on how can we like have all those different storybook libraries which are independently servable be composed into one single one, right? So which you want to then deploy. So that's something that Katrina is currently working on, which I'm really looking forward to. And obviously much more stuff that is coming along after NX13.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you, Yuri. I was planning to say that I have promised on GitHub that storybook composition is coming to NX13. And yeah, I will commit to it. But the thing is that we're not sure yet if it's going to be an actual generator or it will be just some extensive documentation of how to take advantage of NX and do the storybook composition as well. So yeah.
Cool.
Sounds great.
All right.
I know this is my mic okay now?
It's almost a robot, but I think it's okay.
Almost a robot. Okay. I'll talk slowly so that it doesn't go too bad here. And but I was going to say that I know at least maybe not coming in Angular 13 specifically, but we will be, and maybe I know we got some people, Colin is the lead on the Angular vertical here, or one of our representatives on the Angular vertical, but of course we'll be supporting Angular version 13 when that comes out. And that'll come in, we'll have already released version 13 of NX by then, but in one of the future course feature bumps, we'll have that in there, also. So we'll be right in line with how we released, or shooting to be right in line with when the next version is released, so people can update and make sure that everything's still stable and keeps going the way we've been doing.
Cool. All right, let's move on, because I'm sure there's a lot we could talk about for what's coming up in NX13. Just more ergonomics, everything better. One thing I want to know about is what's new in NX console. I know it's like John, you joined the project, and you and Sandy Barr made a lot of progress on it. What's going on? What can we all be excited about in NX console?
Oh, the next big thing for NX console. Well, I could give everyone
the next big thing. I mean, like, what is already there that people who may not have used it for a while.
Right. So yeah, I actually started working pretty much full Nrwl time on NX console in March, and since then, me and Sandy at the time, we increased the performance of it by hundreds of percentages, and this is very noticeable in those bigger workspaces. We added some workspace.json or angular.json IntelliSense, so that when you're actually in those configuration files, you know what you're configuring. We did a lot of bug fixes for running generators, running the builders. We had what was another big thing? We added support for the context menus in the Explorer view, so that you could right-click any file in a project and you could get the context of builders directly without having to worry about names and all that. Because if you're in a bigger workspace and you go deep into folders, you get some pretty long names that are hard to remember.
Mm-hmm.
And those were the big ones I remember at the time, right now anyways. But right now I am planning to fix some terminal stuff. So I actually got a copy of Windows, and I'm going to make Windows better, or I'm going to make support for Windows better for all of our Windows folks. I know there's a lot of problems with Windows, and I'm going to try to fix all those ones.
Cool.
Yeah.
Whenever I do touch NX, I use NX console, and the improvements are appreciated by me, and I know lots of other folks are using it. So
thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Victor, were you
Like
gonna say
if you use an X and you don't use an X console, yeah, I would recommend folks to try it out because it wasn't super stable like a year ago. So if you tried it a year ago, it was kind of a bit in a way. Like right now, it's stable. It's not in a way. It's just pure joy and a lot of value. Like it's one of my I didn't have an issue with it in a long time. So it's just autocomplete stuff, generate stuff for me. Like it genuinely provides a lot of value without ever showing some weird errors like / is not recognized and like all this stuff is in the past, right? So just try it out, right? Even if you use it once or twice a day, it will still be valuable, right? You'll get a lot of value from it.
I want to mention another goal that I have with NX Console is to get Victor on VS Code 100%. I think, Victor, how much percentage of your time is in VS Code now? Like maybe 50%. I'm hoping for at least 80. So
yeah, actually, the most of the time I use it. I'll go ahead. Sorry.
I don't know. I was just saying. I just want to make sure that you're 80% on VS Code.
Yeah.
And convert you.
It is the main reason why I use VS Code. Right, is to interact with the next console. So it works really well. So I really like it.
All right, I want to get to some of the questions coming in on Slack and Twitter. What would you suggest for a company that's heavy into separate repositories and Semver to get them moving into a monorepo?
What does the term heavy into separate repos really mean? I guess if it works for you, I think you should keep doing it. And if you notice problems with sharing code and having to publish stuff, I would recommend looking into a monorepo. But by no means is it the only way of doing things.
Yeah,
we would all recommend a monorepo, but yeah. Whatever works.
I think if people are open to it, that's one thing. So yeah, the interpretation of heavy into, if they're seeing pains of having multi-repo, then it's there's a lot you could talk about. But if it's a pretty charged topic, then
I can maybe chime in a little bit because I worked on a fairly large company and they have all these multi-repos with versioning, and I think the common problem that everyone faces is at some point you're dealing with one team using version 1, one team using version 2, and it's hard for teams to want to migrate to the new version when they don't need to, right? Because they have to build out their own features and stuff. So at some point you're supporting X number of versions and a bunch of branches, and it actually causes a lot of waste, I think, in my opinion. So I think that's probably the number one reason I would look into a monorepo.
Yep. Yeah, if they are open, if the company is open to the idea, then I think the beauty of atomic changes. Anyway, I'm the host. I'm not supposed to say things. Anyone else want to say if a company is open? Victor.
Yeah.
Oh, Kirill.
So we have a post. Go ahead. Yeah, Kirill, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention, having worked in a company recently-ish, where essentially you had we had a one repository where we would have all of our shared components, the design system, if you will, and then each application would be in a separate repo. And the constant problem there was that you have to create a component. You first create it in one repo, then you release it, then you start using it in your application, and then you figure out that, oh, I forgot to add this functionality. You go back, having to do the pull request, the release, all that through multiple times until you actually can integrate it into the product, into the application where it's actually used. And obviously with an NX monorepo approach, that's pretty much not a problem at all. So.
Okay. Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, please.
Just one more thing. I feel like monorepo is one of those things where until you actually implement it and try it, you don't really know what you're kind of opting into. Because before, I've worked in a company where you work with multiple repos and I saw nothing wrong with it. But then like after joining Nrwl and working with companies that have larger code bases, working in a monorepo was like almost not an option. I can't imagine doing the same things without being in a monorepo. So unfortunately, like until you try it, you don't know why you would do it. You can watch all these talks, and you should, but until you try it, like it won't be apparent to you, I don't think.
Yep. Yeah, we've definitely seen that. If there's excitement for it, then there's a way, and we can help you find the way to monorepo. But if there's not, then it's not going to succeed. I've got 2 more questions I'm going to combine into 1.5 questions. Would you recommend using NX with only one app? And the second part of the question is there when does NX not make sense, or when is NX too much for what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I can chime in on the first one, because like that's something, for instance, which I always recommend people. Like using NX with one app, does it make sense? And obviously I'm biased, but I would totally say so. Like I even did that before I joined Nrwl, and I used or started to dive into NX with just one app. And the thing is, like once you start using it, like you benefit obviously not from like the huge dependency graph and things like that. You might even just like convert it like as you had it like previously. Like let's say like you use Angular CLI, you just have like your features in a couple folders, and you migrate them one-to-one into the next repo. And then over time, you start kind of benefiting of the things, right? You might like explore libraries, and like you slowly move like utility stuff into libraries, which is very easily movable, right? And that's when you then explore more and more things, right? You benefit already from the generators, splitting those feature folders up into libraries. Then you also get like more benefits in terms of faster test execution. And that's how you can slowly go into that process. And what might also happen at that point is that you see like your single application might actually evolve into 2 different ones, right? It's like sometimes when you just have the possibility to have one single one, you just have one single one. But as you see like how easily you could share code, it might actually make sense to even like split the single application to 2 different ones and deploy them even separately, right? Because like then the co-sharing piece is kind of a no-brainer, right? Because like they're working in the same workspace, you can just link them together, deploy them separately, and also then scale them separately in the deployment phase, right, in production. So yeah, I would definitely say go for it. And it's also pretty much low risk, I would say, and you will still get all the benefits of the generators and build stuff, which we have been mentioning.
I think to add on to that too is that another reason that it's so helpful, even for one app, is that it really makes you think about how you're architecting your application. So like if you follow the NX best practices on your libraries, like data access libraries and feature libraries, then it really helps you to consider how you're architecting even just one application, never mind multiple applications, and you start figuring out what things could be shared between feature libraries and data access libraries, and where you put code, and that code structure and code organization really does help you just architect and create the application. I think that NX does a great job at helping you stick to those, especially with like the module boundaries and things like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. How it helps you think of NX or an app as a composition of libraries instead of something on its own.
Can I chime in too a bit?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and for example, I have a friend and they just started their startup, right? And they wanted to build a web application, of course. And they would have just a very simple front-facing web application. And I was talking with them, and they were trying to think what technologies they would use and how they would use them. But I definitely recommended NX with whatever. I'm not sure if they went with React or Angular, but that's not important. I recommend going with NX, but because despite the fact that initially it would be just a small single front-facing application, you never know how you're going to scale, right? And if you want to start building something and you don't really know if this is going to scale or how it's going to go, NX provides you with the architecture and the tools that make it a lot easier to scale in the future if you want to.
Yep.
I want to add something else to this as well. And this one is more of like the commands you're using with NX. If you have one app or many apps, you start to develop the muscle memory of running the same NX run command to run your tests and your builds and all that. And I think that's important for a developer experience, because you don't have to think of new ways of how are you going to run your tests or how you're going to build this. And for me personally, because I use NX Console a lot, I could do all those commands from VS Code without having to set things up. And NX gives you a lot of that tooling out of the box, even with just the one app.
Cool. John, while you're here, we have a question about NX Console and Webstorm.
Right.
And I guess the question is like, what's the deal?
So we have 2 NX Console plugins for Webstorm, and they're maintained by people from the community, and we're very appreciative of that. And the reason for that is because Webstorm is pretty much built with Java. And for me personally, I don't really know Java or Kotlin. And for me to help out with that, I need to learn it. And maybe I will, because I want to see all the different NX consoles and different platforms on the same shine and level of helpfulness. So maybe in my free time, I'll learn Kotlin. If anyone wants to teach me, then.
If you got some folks at Nrwl, I'm sure would be happy to spend some time with you.
Yeah.
Victor is a Kotlin fan person.
Yeah, I like Kotlin, and I use IntelliJ or Webstorm, right? So, I would be happy to help you, right? I was actually considering just hopping in myself, like, okay, that's cool. I like Kotlin. I like everything, regarding the IntelliJ platform. But then you wouldn't meet your goal. Like I wouldn't launch VS Code as often if
that's true.
Integration for IntelliJ was basically that's it.
You have to make a choice.
I think you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, so that's true. That's a good point. I'm gonna have to go with the greater good and help everybody else then. So I'll get you with something else, Victor.
All right. Here's a good question, and this question will allow me to step away and get some water because I think the answer will take a little bit. But what are the best practices for coordinating deploys of shared items that are owned by multiple teams?
Coordinating deploys that are shared or owned by multiple teams, as in like a shared component library.
Generally, and like talk about coordinating, or like how do you coordinate anything with multiple teams?
I think the easy way to coordinate is to do it on a cadence. So like scheduling maybe like once every 2 weeks, once every month for something that affects the whole organization would be good, so that people kind of have an idea of when they need to do testing, when they need to support the deploy in any way. So if you do have a portion of your code base that affects everything, you don't want to touch it so that it deploys everything else, I would limit that to a cadence as the easiest way to coordinate it.
Scheduling is a good way to say, so that okay, we've got this point where we're going to do a coordinated deploy of these things, and let's pack as much as we can into that, so that the next one is a month from now or something.
Yeah.
Victor, anything to add? Micro front ends, I think.
Jason is always
some interesting with this.
Yeah, I think there is a delay between me and you folks. Always, when I join some sort of panel, my Wi-Fi stops working.
I thought it was
Mesh network no longer meshes. It's just, it just is what it is. I accept it. It's like living in 1995, honestly. So I agree with Jason about the scheduling part. There is a lot of companies do sort of minor, major, small releases that don't affect each other, like it's very independent. Those can be deployed at will 20 times a day. And the major release that it's deployed on schedule, or at least like sometimes there may be an emergency major release, but usually some schedule that is followed, right? And there is different processes you can put in place to make it easier, like having a separate branch where you can merge things for the next merge release, things like that, right? Micro frontends can help with that because they obviously allow for independent deployability. That's sort of one of the main advantages of micro frontends. But when people use the word micro frontend, they can mean different things. It can mean if you have a fully independent micro frontend with their own copies of your favorite framework, right? Then yes, those you can deploy mostly independently most of the time, so that's not a problem, right? Most of the time, however, when people say micro frontend, they mean things like, oh, we have a giant application that does some banking, right? And we have one section that does mortgage and that other section that does credit cards, and they don't come with their own version of the framework, right? They all rely on some core JavaScript file somewhere. That is the main version, not just of the third-party framework, but also the first-party code that you want to have a single instance of, like some user management thing that covers the whole page, things like that. So in this case, you still probably want to do what Jason was saying and do the coordination bit where you're saying if you want to change the framework, right? Okay, that has to go in the special branch in at least once a week, once a month, or whatever that is, right? If you want to change the user service, user object, right? Same story, right? Because it affects everyone. If you want to make sure it's correct, you have to coordinate that to make sure you deploy everything with the user changing. So it doesn't change the story. And to be clear, that actually is not made in any way harder with monorepos, right? The monorepo and deployment are not related. Okay, so if you're thinking, oh, I'm doing it right now, but how can I do it with a monorepo in exactly the same way you're doing it right now? Okay, there is nothing changes about your deploying from monorepo or deploying from a polyrepo, right? The deployment and the monorepo are orthogonal concerns. If anything, coordinating deployment in the monorepo is easier because everything is together. So you can say this is a SHA that corresponds to a major deployment that deploys everything. How we are going to redeploy everything. But really, in monorepo in no way constrains your deployment. Right? With asterisks, you can have some in-house build like deployment system that doesn't work with monorepos, right? That aside, given that you actually don't have like an artificial constraint, right? There is nothing that constrains your deployment in regards to monorepos. So whatever you do right now, you can still do, right? There's nothing in the way of that, right? So when you divide your deployment strategy, it's a lot less about where the code lives, right? There's nothing to do with that. It's more about, okay, two teams want to deploy together, and because they rely on some shared piece, they need to coordinate somehow. In a polar repo, it would be deploying 3 artifacts together, right, with some job in your CI. In a mono repo, it would be deploying the same 3 artifacts together with a slightly different job because it's going to pull things from the same repo, right? So the orthogonalness, the fact that those concerns are the same, is what I want to what folks often get confused about, right? And that's actually one of the things that I want folks. The previous question about if we want to move to a mono repo, but we are a polar repo company. There are many things like that people mention who object to mono repos. So like, but I want to deploy independently, or like blah, blah, right? Things like that that have nothing to do with mono repos. If you want to keep doing it, that's okay. All right? We deploy independently our artifacts from our private mono repo. Nothing is stopping us from doing that, right?
Thank you.
Are you done with your water? Are you back? Sorry,
I did get water.
I
was
go back.
Standing mat. There we go. But I did get fresh water. I've got a question about behind the scenes how things work at on the NX team. So we've got all these first-class plugins for things like Next.js, Angular, React, Nest.js, Storybook, Cypress. How do you work on these plugins? How do you make sure, like, how do you organize it to stay up to date with what's changing in the technologies that those plugins integrate with? I'll put this to Katerina first. You can talk about. No, okay.
I can answer, I guess. Different people here own different things. So Yuri and Katerina, they manage the Storybook and they keep up to date with what's going on in Storybook. And Colin owns Angular, Krill's owns Next. I feel like I have to go through everyone. John owns the testing tools and Jack owns the React part. And then like Victor and I handle most of the core bits. So we distribute it across many different people so that not everyone on the team needs to be an expert at everything that NX provides. And that's most of the reason why I guess it's important for us to say no to new features. And it's also important for us to be able to support the plugin ecosystem so that if you do want things that are outside of the first-party plugins, then you can go and do so. I think something being a first-party plugin doesn't make it anything better than the plugins. There could very well be a plugin that's better than one of our plugins, but it does mean that's like an example of how to write a plugin, I suppose, and like a model for the community to take after if they wanted to implement something else. So if you wanted to write something for Vue or like other applications, like maybe take a look at the way we do Angular or React. If you wanted to write like a Java backend, maybe take a look at the way we do Node. So I think that's more of the stance on it. But yeah, as far as the team goes with all these different technologies, different people own different things.
And I can add just one small thing. So we do have scripts that can automate like version checks to make sure we're not super behind anything. So like Redux Toolkit, someone actually in the community submitted a PR, so thanks for that. But we also have certain frameworks like Angular, React, and Next.js that we try to keep on top of even more. So we would schedule a release to coincide with the new release. So like when Next.js 11 came out, we lagged a little bit, and moving forward, we're gonna try a lot better to make sure when they release a major version that we keep up with it. So that's basically how we keep up to date.
And then we also have like hundreds and hundreds of eyes out there in the community, right? Like we have lots of contributors, which then also like capture things where we are behind and kind of submit PRs, which we are super thankful for. Like then it's one thing less to think about.
Yep. I know too. If like the Angular.
Can I also mention one thing is that? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so for Angular, when we're reaching a major version, we will start looking at the tagged releases that Angular has beforehand. So like their alphas and betas just before they actually release their major version, and we'll try to keep our NX up to date with those and make sure there's no breaking changes, and any migrations that need to be written we'll have written so that when they do release their major version, we're more or less able to release right on time with that major release.
Victor?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, because I'm like, there is a giant lag, as if I'm on a different planet. I don't know. I would rely on you, Jeff, to let me know when I can speak. But this is the only time we can do it. Use this power wisely. So I wanted to mention that we also like chatting with an engineer in Contact, have shared Slacks, meetings with teams who work on other tools, right? It's a very small community of tool developers, right? If Cypress folks are changing Cypress or Storybook folks doing something, we can talk to them, right? And resolve issues fairly quickly. I know that, like a gazillion of shared Slacks we have with different companies, right? Who are working on their own tools. So we can make sure if, there's some misalignment. Usually it's not misalignment with the next because we can do whatever, right? To make sure the tools work. It's misalignment between other tools, right? If you have a version of, I don't want to name it particular tools, but one version of a tool that we depend on or we provide a plugin for and another one, and they don't work together. That's harder for us to resolve because we don't own that piece, right? They own the corresponding pieces. So we have to work with them to say, okay, let us help you to adjust things a bit, right? So you can work together, so we can implement a migration in NX, so you can, people can stay up to date, right? There is also a different bar for us and for other tools in terms of what it means to migrate, right? We came from a particular culture where breaking changes is just not okay, just cannot happen, right? Just not an option. And we try to follow it in NX. I know, folks can have different experiences, but we really try, right? To make sure you can go from NX 9 to 10 to 11 to 12 in a single go without really having to adjust that much in your workspace. It doesn't work perfectly, but it works, reasonably well. Some other tools don't have the same, they didn't come from the same culture, right? They can break things a lot more between major releases, right? But if you're an enterprise, you don't care that the release is a major, right? You still have to be up to date. You don't care that number went from 7 to 8 or whatever, right? If it doesn't work anymore. So we have to help them, and that's a big headache for us, right? We essentially end up writing custom migration scripts for external tools to make sure the giant company that uses that tool can move from one major to another one with relative ease, right? With as little work as possible, right? And but a lot of it is due to the help of those other companies who help us, right? Who help us write those migrations, tell us what's going on, like Zoom with us, make changes to the tools to accommodate, to make sure migrations work and things like that. So everyone basically is friendly with OpenChat. So it's very nice to be in this field.
I think all the first class plugins, we at least have some relationship with the people working on the thing they integrate into NX, and they're excited to support NX or to support the integration, make sure that's good. So it's and we also sponsor projects that we incorporate into NX as well, just to support them for helping make NX a great tool. Okay, I've got a good one here. It was one of the last questions asked, but it's interesting to me. So, what's the status of switching from Webpack to something like Vite or Vite? I don't know how you pronounce it, or Rollup or something like that. Is that being considered? Is it being worked on? Maybe some plugins it makes sense for. What say you? And I'll say Victor can answer this unless someone else raises their hand and says they can answer better than Victor. All right, Victor.
Well, I think there are lots of people who can. Okay, I think there are lots of folks who can do it better than me. So like Jack is you'll be surprised. I pretend to be a front-end developer, but I'm not. Right? I'm a back-end developer in disguise. Right? So I put on glasses, blue headphones, like he's probably doing front-end, but it's not true. Right? It's just not true. In general, so I think that if folks want to provide a, I'm like, you should see my UI. It's squares within squares, okay, and they're all green. Okay, that's the best I can do. So I'm really bad at front end. I just like the JS ecosystem, right? That's different. I like the openness of it, a lot of other things that JS ecosystem brings. But the front end, I'm just super unskilled. That's why I'm so grateful to be surrounded by people who are so much better than me at this stuff. So I'm like, oh, that is cool. I would never be able to do anything like that in my life, even if I try very hard, right? I will just tell about our guidelines for how we try to move from technology to technology, and then folks can provide a concrete answer, right? The guidelines in general is as follows, right? That for certain stacks, right, for example, for Angular, it's a good example, we really don't own how Angular runs because the Angular team owns it, right? So we could provide a different way of serving an Angular app, but it's a big headache, and not because like we can figure it out with smart people, a lot of talent, etc. It's more about when the team doesn't own it. Like the React team doesn't own the Webpack way of building React, right? So it's easier for us to provide different ways of doing it because there is not a single player who is like, you just need to do it this way, right? Yeah, which is very hard for us to, like none of the docs online then would match what we offer, etc. Right? So it's going to be a headache. So I would say that for certain things like Angular, it's just harder for us, right? If there is some large company who wants to do it for for example, for the Angular stack, we can help them, but it's harder for us to take it on because we basically have to fight against the biggest, the team, the Angular team that owns a big part of this stack, right? For other things like React and stuff, it's not the same, right? We own how we build and run and serve React, right? Jack and Kirill and other folks implemented most of this stuff, right? So as a result, it's easier for us to provide an alternative implementation. In general, that ecosystem is more, it doesn't have this one giant single, big player, right? There are lots of players who provide different ways of doing things. It's easier for us to provide an alternative, right? So it's more likely to happen in those ecosystems than in the one that are sort of more controlled, right? In the same way, if you look at like a backend, .NET and Java are the same. .NET is there's a lot of control by Microsoft. It's much harder to introduce something else entirely and enter the ecosystem. Whereas in Java, it's like free for all, right? Everyone is trying their own thing, so there is more options, right? And so it's easier for a new player to introduce a different option.
Yeah.
Maybe Jack can or someone else can provide a better answer regarding Webpack.
Yeah. So I think Next.js is falling in the same line of reasoning for Angular, right? Like they use Webpack and they're not going to move on Webpack anytime soon or ever. So we're basically supporting
Coppers now. Is that his name? Working at Webpack.
Yeah, right. So they're basically bought into that technology. Now, when it comes to like playing React app, like Victor said, they don't specifically say you have to use Webpack. So something like Vite. By the way, Chow corrected you, Jeff. It's called Vite, not Vite.
Oh.
But so there's nothing really stopping us from using Vite or Snowpack or Parcel, whatever. But for us, it's really a balance of how much effort, right? Because we know Webpack is still the most used bundler in the industry. So if we move off of it, that's going to affect our users. And also we have to think about migration between Webpack to something like Vite or Parcel, whatever. And it just doesn't seem like it's something that will happen anytime soon. That being said, we do use Rollup for bundling our React libraries. And there's also nothing really stopping you from using your own executors.
Yeah.
So your workspace executors or some kind of run command shell script, if you want to use those tools.
Yeah, that's a great point. That you can use 99% of the first class React plugin or whatever plugin, but use your own builder if you want to build your own. Like use your own builder. You could just not builder, executor. Sorry, you can just use run commands to invoke some script you write without having to create a plugin or anything. So yeah, good points. All right, we're at the end of our time. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating, and thank you so much for all the great questions from the audience. I know there were some on Twitter and in the Slack channel that didn't get answered, so I'm sure folks from this panel will be in that Slack and can maybe look back and throw in a comment or two. All right, thank you, everyone.